Welcome to Photoactive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElhearn.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
Today we are happy to welcome Lauren Caris Short, whose new book, The Complete Guide to Food Photography, has made me drool. Lauren, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I like food. I like cooking. I'm not a cooking fanatic. I have a number of cookbooks. When Jeff and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago, I said to him, I won't buy a cookbook if it doesn't have photos. Mm-hmm. I need to have the photos so my brain can show me the end game of a recipe. And photos are so important in cookbooks. And I guess they're getting better and better. But for a long time, photos were really just there to just fill up space, weren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I actually have a really similar outlook on cookbooks, way before I got into food photography. Even in cookbooks where some of the recipes have pictures and some don't, I'll tend to only make the ones that do because, like you said, I want to see how it looks. And it's part of what makes cookbooks exciting and gives you a bit of a vision for the recipe.
Did you get into this because you like cooking?
I did, yeah. So I actually started off in a very different career in the tax world. I was working in London and then we moved to Switzerland and I got another job in tax. I'd always loved cooking, knew I wanted to work in food in some capacity, but I wasn't quite sure what. I did an internship in a bakery for a while, sort of dabbled in my own cake business.
Tough hours working in a bakery.
Yeah, it was really good fun. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, it was a great experience. And then, life happened. I was getting married and all sorts. So having a practical job made a lot of sense. So I got a job in tax, did all my qualifications, and I did enjoy it. Honestly, I worked with great people, but it just wasn't what I could see myself doing for the next 40 to 50 years. So I started a food blog on the side just as a hobby, because I've always loved baking and cooking. And then what happened was kind of unexpected for me because I'd never really picked up a proper camera in my life before, was that I just fell in love with the photography side of the blog and found that I was more excited to take the pictures of the food than to write the recipe. So then I was like, okay, this could be a thing. And as I did it more and more, started to do a bit of freelance work and it kind of evolved into, where I am now.
That's really interesting because most people would have dabbled in photography and sort of rolled this into an activity. The fact that you picked up photography afterwards is, I don't want to say unusual, but it's not the normal way. Most people don't do taxes and then get into photography.
I don't think so. It's still a skill that comes in handy sometimes, but I'm glad it's not my 9 to 5 anymore.
Hey, in a previous life, I worked for a consulting actuarial firm, so I know how you feel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you know that well.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you're probably one of the few freelance photographers who actually knows how to do their taxes and actually does their taxes. So already you're a step up.
Pro tip, open up a tax consultancy for freelance photographers because they...
Oh my word. Maybe that's my next move after this.
So what I find, as I was looking through the book, I had an idea about how this was done. I've seen things about food photography before, but it made me realize all the detail. It's like doing fashion photography, except with models that don't move and talk back to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which I guess has its pros and cons. It's pros in the sense of it will do whatever you want it to do, but in another sense, you have to do everything with it that you want it to do. You can't just say, could you just turn that way a bit? Or can you just look a little bit more shiny and fresh, please? It's a very involved type of photography. I guess it's like any other kind of still life photography where you're really in control of the environment and the subject. So it makes it quite a long process sometimes.
Is it? I was wondering how long a shoot takes for you, because we'll go into the details of the fact that you've got the makeup artist for the food, which is the food stylist, and you've got the lighting to set up,
exactly.
And you've got to prep everything. Either if it's cold, you've got to keep it in the freezer or the fridge, and all that. That's complicated. But what's the average time if you're shooting, let's say, a recipe where you're shooting anywhere from 2 or 3 to a dozen photos?
I would say it does depend on the shoot, but probably the average would be 1 to 3 hours, maybe.
Oh, that's not bad. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten quicker over the years. And there's some things that you just have to be quicker about, like ice cream or something like that. And in those situations, I have a bit of a different process where I'll use a stand-in first to make sure that the lighting and the composition and everything is ready to go. And then I can bring in the food at the last minute. But yeah, I mean, if it's a client shoot and the clients are here, it can run longer depending on how many different scenes and stuff. But an average, probably a couple of hours, something like that.
Okay, I would have expected it took more than that, but I guess you have your own studio, either home studio or not at home?
Yeah, well, sort of at home. I have.
Well, a studio for this could just be a spare room, right?
Oh, absolutely. And for me, it wasn't even a spare room at the beginning. It was just a corner of my living room for quite a long time. And then it became a spare bedroom situation. And now I've just actually a few months ago moved into a dedicated studio space, which is a luxury for sure. And not something that's necessary, but it's definitely been something that I've really enjoyed having, especially when I've had clients and they've got space to actually be here and get involved and everyone isn't on top of each other. And yeah, it's very nice to have that, but it's not necessary.
And I would imagine you don't have to do as much tear down setup here, or, you know, after a long day of shooting, you can just leave your lights and everything there rather than taking everything down because you really want to have dinner and watch some TV or something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually been one of the most transformative things, is just that 2 hours that I was mentioning does not include the setup, tear down, preparation of the food. That's more like just the shoot. So for sure, having a separate space is nice, that I can leave soft boxes up and not have to, you know, constantly be taking things up and down, which does make the whole workflow of a shoot a bit more efficient as well.
Do you have a kitchen in this studio?
I do. You
kind of need to, don't you?
It's sort of just like yeah, you do really. Obviously, when I was working at home, I had our home kitchen and I could sort of ferry stuff between there and the bedroom. But now my studio is just kind of one big room. So I've got an IKEA kitchen in the corner, which works really, really well. And I set it up in a way that it could also serve as a shooting space. So if there needed to be a brand who needs something where they need photos of the cooking process or something like that, the kitchen itself can be used for that as well.
So the first, and I guess the most important element of this is lighting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I made it chapter 1 of the book, because probably for most kinds of photography, right, lighting is the thing that will transform a photo the most.
That was one of the first things that stuck out to me, because normally, and I'm generalizing in a big way, but you know, a book like this, you would talk about composition and placement and all of that. And so I was a little surprised that you jumped right into lighting. But for food photography, because as you mentioned earlier, you're controlling everything. You're controlling the light, the ambient light, you know, everything, and you want to have that control. Can you tell us more? And, you know, for people who don't have the book yet and may not have done much more food photography, can you go into a little bit of why the lighting is so important? Because, you know, like, hey, I've got a nice big window, I'll just take some pictures there, versus what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with food photography, the lighting is going to define the mood of the photo, and that can really depend on what it is you're trying to capture. Are you trying to get a rustic country scene where you're imagining, you know, some light coming through a little dark window into a wooden kitchen? Or are you going for a modern, light, bright restaurant with very clean lines and a lot of light? Those two lighting situations are very different. And if you try to light them the same, neither of them is going to have the right effect. So being able to control your lighting is probably, for me, it's like step 1 of defining the story of the image that you're trying to shoot. And then to me, next comes the composition and the props and all of that kind of supporting it. Because I think those things are a little bit more forgiving when it comes to creating a scene with a story and a mood. But the lighting, you can't change that. If you've got a huge bright window and you're trying to capture something dark and moody and atmospheric, it's just not going to happen. So, yeah.
So how did you learn this? Because you weren't a photographer originally, you said. How did you dive in and figure all this out? Because these photos are just extraordinary in your book. They're all wonderful.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it's been a lot of years of self-learning, practice, research. I studied a lot of books. One of my favorite books is Light, Science and Magic, which is not specifically a food photography book, but there are some examples of products and things in there. But just understanding the fundamentals of light overall is going to help you in whatever kind of photography you do. So that was a huge thing for me.
Yeah, it has sections on angles and light versus distance and all that, the fall off and things. It's a very useful book.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's one I recommend all the time to people who are starting out and like, where do I start with this? I'm like, this is a really good starting point. And then, a lot of practice, which definitely in the beginning feels frustrating, but I think that's just the process of learning. You have to go through figuring out what doesn't work to get to what does work. I think maybe it's the tax side of me that is quite technical. I've always had that sort of mathsy technical side of myself as well as the creative side. So I really enjoy knowing why of things. So I want to know how a sensor works, why it works. What does this mean? What does that setting mean? So really learning the ins and outs of that gave me a lot of, I always sort of explain to people, like when you have that technical knowledge, you have the ability to make a creative decision and actually know how to execute what the vision in your mind is. Whereas if you're sort of just winging it in auto mode, you don't give yourself as much opportunity to exercise your creativity in the same way. So a lot of self-study, a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of courses, a lot of books.
Did you start out by just cooking a lot of your own meals and photographing them?
Yeah, exactly. So with my food blog, I started that like 2015, and that was kind of my whole practice thing. And the first year of photos are not good. It is still online. I haven't taken it down. And I think you can clearly see the evolution of when I had no idea what I was doing through to just every single shoot I did trying to improve on it and, get a little bit better as I shot. Yeah, just anything.
Even though you're focusing so much on the lighting, I want to point out that in the book, most of your setups, you're basically using one light and some modifiers, either like a softbox or a bounce card or something like that. So, I think a lot of people get scared by lighting and don't really know what to do. And this is sort of reassuring because, oh my gosh, it looks so complicated. But as long as you have one light and you know how to move it around a little bit, it's not that difficult. And I think the book does a really good job of showing that, in fact, there's one section that just talks about using multiple lights. That's really just kind of a quick overview. Do you find that that you're just not using multiple lights, or is everything pretty much just your one light source and then V cards and all of that?
Yeah, the majority of the time I'm using a single light setup, and I think for food, the scenes themselves are not normally that big, so two lights aren't that necessary unless you've got, the exception would be something like a product shot or a more commercial style bottle shot. But even then I might use one light and move it around. But yeah, there's a lot you can do with one light, different modifiers. And that's a big thing that I wanted to highlight in the book. And I've got a whole page with an example just of some artichokes on a flat board, just showing how different they look just by switching out the modifier, and how that can be such a powerful thing. With the same single flash gun, just a really basic speed light, you can really achieve almost infinite different looks just by changing the modifier. So for me, I find that is flexible enough 90% of the time.
That's interesting. So we had Sandra Cohn on a while back, and she does portraits of people, and I think she generally works with two lights, maybe even three. But it makes more sense with food where you're often shooting top down or at a 45-degree angle, so you don't need to light the other side of the face, that sort of thing. Food in many ways is more forgiving, and I think it looks more natural to have that shadow on one side and the light on another side with food, because it looks like the pie you've put on the windowsill, right? The way the light highlights it.
Yeah, exactly. I love that contrast of highlight and shadow in food images, because otherwise I think food has a tendency to look very flat very easily. It's not got as much depth as like a face or, another subject. You're talking about a pie could be 1.5 to 2 inches high. So unless you've got that contrast, it can start to look just, a bit flat, a bit boring. And for me personally, I really like that shadow increases that sort of 3D effect. It brings you into the picture. And like you said, most of the time we're trying to emulate what you actually see in real life. It's even when you're talking about like brand work, they want to show what their product actually looks like to the person who hopefully will buy it or, order it or something like that. And if it looks too artificially studio lit, it's not really generally what we're going for with food.
The number of times I've bought something where the picture on the package doesn't look anything like the food inside.
People say this to me all the time. As soon as they find out what I do, they're like, but that McDonald's burger never looks the same.
Yeah.
When
not
it
just
comes.
that. So you talk about composition. There's one thing I find that's really interesting, and not just in the photos in your book, but in photos in general, is food photography often crops items like dishes and plates and things. And it kind of gives a feeling that the spread is endless.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I like to teach my students as well. So I call it intentional cropping. So if you have maybe 3 plates, I would have one as the main focal point and then another one sort of really intentionally cropped, like a good third to half the plate cropped off. I think if you sort of just skim the edge, it can look a bit accidental, like, I just kind of missed the frame a bit. But yeah, just giving this impression that what you're seeing is a snippet of the table or the preparation space or the restaurant, and there's more going on outside of this. It's not always something I do. I also do quite enjoy shooting really minimal things where you've just got the subject and a background. But yeah, I think the idea that there's always more going on outside of this frame it just adds to that story element. It gives the viewer sort of an idea of how this extends beyond the frame as well, which is, it's cool.
So you have a whole section on food styling, and we know that it's all fake, that you do all sorts of fake things to make it look like real food. I mean, I saw a YouTube video once that in order to shoot pancakes with maple syrup, they poured motor oil on the pancakes because maple syrup doesn't look like maple syrup. Do you have to do a lot of trickery like that?
Honestly, not as much as you think. I mean, as a food photographer, I'm not a food stylist. I think it's important as a food photographer to have some knowledge of food styling, but I would never take a job as a food stylist on a set because it's just not my area of expertise. I think the food photography definitely has a reputation for ice cream is mashed potatoes and everything like that.
Yeah.
And I think it used to be like that more than it is now. Advertising standards have sort of tightened up. So if you're shooting something that is, selling a product, the photo has to be of the actual product, which in my opinion is a good thing. So it's definitely not something that I come across that often. More the things I end up doing is just altering the way I cook something or giving it a bit of a helping hand on set. So I typically, like, if I was shooting something, say, with like broccolini on the side, I'm probably not going to fully cook it the way that I would if I was actually serving it. I'll undercook it a little bit or just blanch it so it looks really nice and bright and green, and it looks great, it looks fresh, but it's probably way too crunchy that you wouldn't actually serve it. Or give things a little bit of an oil coating. Probably one of my more food styly tips that I do quite often is I have a little spray bottle filled with a mixture of 50% glycerin and 50% water. You can spray that on anything, fruits, vegetables, glasses, and it gives that sort of speeded up condensation effect, but it doesn't run off or dry or melt. So it gives you more time.
Okay.
So that's probably the thing that I would do the most common that you wouldn't necessarily eat directly.
You mentioned time, because time seems to be such a much bigger factor here. Not only just trying to get things done in a good time for your time and clients' time, but the very few times that I've tried to do some food photography, it always seems like a race. Like, this thing is going to wilt, this thing is going to melt. This, it looked really good a minute ago, but then I had to mess with my light, and now it's just kind of like flopped dead. Do you have any tips or anything for dealing with food? Particularly, I mean, I am sort of assuming that a lot of our listeners do not do this on the regular, and we'd like to, get a glimpse into the professional side of things. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with, this time crunch of having to deal with food that is not going to cooperate with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a huge thing for me is pre-lighting. So I'll always set up my scene with the props, even maybe just some stand-in food. Like if it's a salad, I'll just throw a bit of lettuce in the bowl that I'm going to actually serve it in, just to have something there. And I'll take all the shots I need to do all my lighting adjustments and, get everything else looking how I want it to look. And then bring in that food fresh at the last minute. So I'm pretty much ready to push the shutter and get the shot. I don't want something sitting there longer than it needs to be. Especially with things like ice cream, drinks that have ice, you've got a very limited time with those things. So pre-lighting is one of the most important things that I do, and has really transformed sort of the quality of the subjects that I can shoot.
Well,
and it almost takes that pressure off as well, because you have time to kind of play around with it without thinking like, oh, it's all going to wilt in front of me and now I'm rushing and this isn't so good and that's not how I want it to be.
You're in Switzerland. Do you do all your ice cream photography in the winter with the windows open? Wouldn't that make it easier?
Oh, it would, as Switzerland don't have air conditioning.
Yes.
Nothing like that. I would love to say that I could only photograph ice cream in the winter, but it really depends what people need when. So yeah, again, pre-lighting is definitely my friend when it comes to those things.
So you say it depends on what people need when. Do you find your work to be seasonal? I mean, are you shooting things now in the summer that would be appropriate for, say, magazines, like winter dishes, holiday dishes, things like that? Or does it all not really subscribe to a time zone like that?
It depends on the job. If it's a lot of the work I do is sort of with specific brands or things for their products, so it's not necessarily seasonal. But for sure, we have this thing. I'm sure other photography niches, maybe fashion and stuff, have it as well, where we call it Christmas in July, where everyone's sort of shooting for the winter in the summer, which with food can be really tricky, especially in, well, I don't know about other countries, but in Switzerland, the food we have is very seasonal, which is a great thing in itself. I'm all for sustainability, eating berries in the summer and not eating them in November, all of that kind of thing. But then when you've got a job that requires you to make a pumpkin soup in July and there's no pumpkins anywhere, then it can be challenging just sourcing the things that you need.
Well, do you just fake it and put in some food coloring in a leek and potato soup, for example?
I've never put food coloring in a leek and potato soup, but I think it would be, if it was something where there could be a substitute, like, you could use sweet potato instead of squash, or recently I had to make a cherry pie and I had to use frozen cherries, and like that was fine.
Yeah.
But if it's something like you need to do a whole baked squash,
right, you need squash.
So it depends. Sometimes there are ways that you can get around it, but other times, it's just another complication. But it's just something I'm sure every industry has something similar.
Another thing I wanted to mention that you cover in the book is a lot of the post editing that gets done and compositing things, because again, this is a thing where you want to try to get, I mean, like everything, you want to try to get it as good as you can in camera, but I know that there are a few examples, and I'll also point people. You made some videos that go along with this, and I watched a video of you doing the spice cake, and to get the spice cake shot and the spoon and the drizzle of the caramel, like that required compositing some images together. How often do you find yourself doing that, and is it pretty complicated usually, or just sort of basic Photoshop layering stuff?
I would say I end up doing it quite often when I've got an action shot. So in the book, like you said, the caramel cake, there's sort of a cake sitting on a cake stand, and then I'm drizzling, or my food stylist is drizzling some caramel on the top. And probably most of the time, you're not going to get the perfect sort of swizzle drizzle and the cake looking exactly how you want it to in the same shot, because you might get that perfect drizzle way later in the shoot, and by that time the cake is covered in caramel and it doesn't look great. So I end up compositing for most of those shots. I almost go into them planning to do that. Sometimes it's also just a focus thing, depending on how deep the subject is that I'm shooting. It's almost like a little bit of focus stacking, where I really want the front of the cake to be in focus, but I also want that drizzle to be really nice and sharp. So I might have to just move the focus and then shoot the drizzle. But it's definitely, for those kinds of things, it's not anything complicated. It really is normally a 2-layer, maximum 3-layer Photoshop situation where I just mask it in and then do any cleanups.
Well, there's an example in the book of a photo of a bottle of monkey shoulder whiskey where you took 5 photos and put them together in order to get the different elements of the lighting just right.
Yes, so that's probably one of the more complicated compositing situations. And this is one of those things where the reason I did that was because I shot this as a one light setup to kind of show people that you can do it. Not that necessarily you always would with a bottle or a drink. That's sort of where you might bring in multiple lights. So you have one doing the back glow, one doing the rim light, one doing the key light.
Because of the glass that moves, that changes the direction of the light.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, say you have a softbox on the side. If you've got it around enough to light the label, you're probably going to have a big ugly strip down the side of the bottle. So taking those things separately and having a shot where you're focusing on the cap and a shot where you're focusing on the label and then the rim and the glow of the bottle, being able to put those together afterwards is it's time consuming more than complicated.
But your camera's in the same position for every shot, right? So you don't have to realign.
Yes, that's really important. It's actually, if it was to move, that becomes a real pain, because I want those shots to line up exactly so that I don't have to be aligning anything. I could just, get my mask out, bring the label in, bring the cap in, and just bring the parts of those layers that I want.
And when you shoot cocktails, are these the actual cocktails, or do you sometimes alter the contents because of the way it's going to work with the light?
No, I think with the cocktails, mostly they're generally the real thing. I mean, you could sort of think, well, if you're shooting a martini, couldn't you just shoot a glass of water? Wouldn't it look the same?
No, because then you don't get the legs on the inside of the glass.
Exactly. It just doesn't behave the same. Like alcohol does behave in a certain way. So even though they're both clear.
But you could just pour vodka or gin without making the actual martini.
That is true. Yes, you could do. Yeah, for sure.
I speak as someone who has been learning cocktails in the second year of lockdown.
Yes, that became our hobby as well, I have to say. I do enjoy a good Negroni now.
Oh, I hate the Negroni. Oh, God, that's terrible. I have perfected the martini, and I'm going to tell you, the cranberry margarita. Equal parts of cranberry and lime juice, pure cranberry juice, not the kind of cranberry drink with sugar and water, but add as much cranberry juice as lime juice, and it's a game changer.
I'll have to try that because the margarita is also our favorite.
Okay. So what's next? Are you going to start working with a cookbook author, for example, to make a cookbook?
Who knows? Possibly. At the moment, I don't have anything like that in the pipeline. What I'm focusing on at the moment is Food Photography Academy, which is my online school with all my online courses. I'm going to be working on a lighting course to come out before the end of this year. So that will complement the book really well. to have a lot of visual demonstrations of all the different lighting setups I do, flash tutorials, all of those things. So that's kind of my main focus at the moment. Continuing with YouTube and Food Photography Academy and seeing where it goes.
Okay. Lauren, thanks again for joining us. The book is called The Complete Guide to Food Photography from Rocky Nook. You can get this book for 40% off with the discount code Lauren40, Lauren 40. Don't tell them. This is like a special discount code. And if you are subscribed to our newsletter, we'll be giving away 2 copies of the book to lucky subscribers. You don't have to do anything. Just subscribe to the newsletter. Go to photoactive.co, sign up for the newsletter, and we'll only send you messages every 2 weeks when we have a podcast coming out, and you're automatically entered into the drawing. Lauren, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, time for our snapshots. What have you got, Jeff?
Well, my snapshot this week is a webcam. I've written about webcams, especially at the beginning of COVID lockdown, and I found out about this new one. It's called the Insta360 Link. Now, Insta360 is a company. They've made 360-degree little handheld cameras, and they've moved into this webcam. And let me tell you, the webcam market is so in need of something because most of them are just crap. I can put some links to articles that I've written about how
most of them are what?
Most of them are crap. They're terrible.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Most standalone webcams are based on really old technology. They just don't work very well. And so I think because of COVID and because of so many people working at home, we're finally seeing some innovation and, companies actually not just skirting by on the garbage that they've had for a long time. So anyway, what's nice about this Insta360 Link, let me step back. It's expensive. It's like $300 for this.
Okay.
And so this is going to be for somebody who, has more dedicated needs. You are, giving presentations. You are, kind of presenting a more professional image than, just, hey, I'm a home worker and I'm going to check in every once in a while with my team kind of a thing. But what's interesting about it is it has basically a camera on a little gimbal arm that can move. And it has a mode where it will follow you. So if you are moving around, it'll keep you centered. But it can also change its digital zoom. So maybe you're just showing your head, or maybe your head and torso, or your full body if you're standing up. And there's a whiteboard mode where you can, be like working on a whiteboard. And part of my interest in this is it's using a lot of AI technology. And if you, for example, hold your hand up to it, just like palm facing the camera, it recognizes that and triggers that to switch between just a static mode to look at you versus follow you around. So it's a really interesting application of technology. I didn't buy this. I have this out for review. I'm going to probably write about it for my column in Popular Photography. But it's a cool idea. And I think for people who really need higher quality, especially higher quality than what you're going to get on your computer itself, it's really pretty cool.
So for all those people who are regular interviewees on cable news, buy this webcam.
Oh my gosh.
Because all of the bad webcams, or the laptop looking up under their chins and the bad lighting, it's incredible how bad it is.
It is amazing how many people that you still see, 3 years into the pandemic 2 years, whatever it is. It's 500 years into the pandemic. That
the 11,000th wave.
The 11,000th wave, that you have so many people on TV who are working from home. And you're right. You're like, oh, look, here's this respected individual, and I can see every hair in his nose because I'm basically just looking straight up his nose. It's amazing. So, Kirk, what do you have this week?
I got a new Mac. I got myself a M2 MacBook Air. Now, I bought one of these when it first came out. I bought it to review, and I was going to keep it, but I decided to return it because my M1 MacBook Air, it was nearly 2 years ago, the M1 MacBook Air came out. I bought it with 8 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabyte SSD, and it was fine. With my MacBook Air, I bought the base model, $999, 8 gigabytes of RAM, 256 SSD. With this one, I bought the same, but there's a problem with these new Macs that if you get the 256 gigabyte SSD, it's a lot slower than the 512. And I'm talking it's half as fast, maybe 53% as fast, but it's noticeable. You won't see this in all your real world activities, but what I do notice with the faster SSD is it's really snappy. It starts up a lot more quickly, etc. One of the reasons I decided to spec this out is because I'm thinking this is a laptop I'll keep 5 years. I probably mentioned this a couple years ago with the iMac, with the M1 iMac. I have the same thoughts. These processors are so good, we won't need to upgrade for a long time. I've got 16 gigs and a terabyte in my iMac. Got 16 gigs and 512 in the MacBook Air. And I even went for the 10-core graphics thing because why not? If I'm going to spec it out, go all the way. I like the form factor. I like the color. I don't care about the fingerprints because I got midnight. But I really think they're not going to change this form factor for many years. And this is going to be a laptop I think that's going to last a long time. It's a lot more expensive than the M1 MacBook Air. They're still selling the M1 model. But if you don't have an M1 and you're just upgrading to an M processor MacBook Air, I'd strongly recommend getting one of these.
I would also point out that the battery life on these is amazing. And I have the M1 Max MacBook Pro that came out at the end of last year. And just as a real world example, yesterday I had to take my car in to get it serviced. And so I went to a coffee shop and I was sitting outside in this outdoor seating and I opened up my laptop and I realized that I had forgotten to charge it and I had 30% charge left. Now, on my old 16-inch Intel MacBook Pro that I had, that would have given me maybe 20, 30 minutes and I would have been out of luck, especially because I was sitting outside. There's no power outside in the little outdoor things that they've set up. With this, I didn't even think twice about it, other than that little vestigial memory of, oh, geez, I only have 30%. I worked there for an hour and a half and was down to about 27%. Like it's if you have not gotten a M1 or M2 based laptop, you will not believe the battery life until you actually have one.
In addition, I got the 67-watt power adapter, and this thing charges really fast. I didn't time it, but I charged from 50% to 100% this morning in, I don't know, less than a half hour.
Good heavens.
So if you do need to charge it quickly, spend a little bit extra. It's not that much extra, but spend a little bit more to get the 67-watt adapter. Okay, that's enough. It's dinner time, and I'm thinking about how the food I'm going to make for dinner is going to look. Now, this is going to really obsess me for a while here.
Time to go take some pictures.
All right. Until next time, Jeff.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's photoactivecast in one word. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast app.